Welcome to The Velvet Murmurs, where every whisper hides a secret. I am so glad you joined us for today's mystery. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you are tuning in from. We love hearing from mystery lover from all over the world. Hercule Poirot and The Honour That Killed, Chapter 1, The Letter from Surrey. It was a bleak, grey morning in early March when the first post arrived at Whitehaven Mansions. The London fog lay heavy upon the streets, muffling the distant hum of trams and the calls of newspaper boys. Hercule Poirot, having just completed the symmetrical arrangement of his breakfast tray, was surveying the toast rack with mild displeasure when a sharp knock sounded at the door. "Come in, mon ami," he called, without looking up. The door opened to reveal Captain Hastings, neat as ever, though the damp air had rendered his fair hair somewhat rebellious. He carried a small stack of letters in one hand and a folded copy of the Times in the other. "Morning, Poirot. A quiet post today," said Hastings cheerfully. "Bills, invitations, and, one marked urgent. From Surrey, it seems." Poirot, always alert to the peculiar, reached out for the envelope with delicate fingers. "Surrey, you say? A county most peaceful, unless, of course, the peace conceals a tragedy." He slit open the envelope with his silver paper knife and began to read. His brow furrowed slightly. "Tiens, how curious." "What is it?" asked Hastings, settling opposite him. Poirot's grey-green eyes flicked up from the letter. "It is from a gentleman named Dr. Lionel Seddon, residing in the village of Larkspur Hollow near Guildford. He writes of a young lady recently deceased, whose death, though certified as natural, has left behind certain doubts. Her name was Jasmine Allen. She was 18 years of age, a promising student, apparently on the verge of entering medical college." Hastings frowned. 18? That's dreadfully young. What does he suspect? Poirot placed the letter carefully upon the table as though it were a fragile relic. "He does not say so directly, but one phrase, 'There is something about her father's haste to cremate the body that troubles me,' catches my attention." Hastings let out a low whistle. "Good Lord, you think it could be—" Poirot raised a hand. "Ne précipitons pas, my dear Hastings. We think nothing as yet, but the circumstances, how do you English say, smell a little of the fish." He rose from his chair, adjusting the perfectly measured crease of his trousers. "A brilliant young girl, full of ambition and life, dies suddenly of the heart, le cœur, at 18. And the doctor, a man of science, senses unease." "Mais oui, Hastings, this interests me greatly." Hastings leaned forward eagerly. "Then you mean to go to Surrey?" Poirot smiled faintly. "When a letter arrives at 9 o'clock, mon ami, one must not decide at 10 that it was a waste of time. We shall take the 10:45 train from Waterloo. Pack lightly, if you please. I have the feeling this case will not require mud-stained boots, but rather the exercise of the little grey cells." The village of Larkspur Hollow lay nestled between two low ridges, a cluster of cottages and hedgerows, where time seemed to linger politely rather than pass. The taxi from Guildford station wound through narrow lanes flanked by budding hawthorn, and as the first chimneys came into sight, the air grew thick with wood smoke and the scent of wet earth. Dr. Lionel Seddon awaited them at the gate of a modest stone house marked "The Beeches." He was a thin, greying man of about 50, with the nervous eyes of one who has spent too long observing other people's pain. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, thank you for coming," he said, shaking hands briskly. "I hardly know if I have done right in troubling you, but, well, it has been on my mind ever since." Poirot inclined his head graciously. "When a matter weighs upon the conscience, it is not a trouble, but a duty, Doctor. You will tell us everything." Dr. Seddon led them into his consulting room, a pleasant space smelling faintly of ether and tea. On his desk lay several papers, neatly stacked, and a small silver photograph frame showing a smiling girl in a school uniform. "That is Jasmine Allen," said the doctor quietly. "Her death certificate lists cardiac failure, but she was not a sickly child. In fact, she had the vitality of youth. Her father, Mr. Edmund Allen, insisted upon immediate cremation before I could even suggest a post-mortem. Poirot studied the photograph. The girl's eyes were bright, intelligent, and full of the kind of hope that mocks the very idea of mortality. "When did this occur?" he asked. 11 days ago, replied the doctor. She had recently received her examination results, brilliant ones. She was to study medicine at King's College in September. I saw her 2 days before her death, fit as ever, chatting about her plans. Then suddenly in the night, she was gone. "And the father?" said Hastings. "How did he take it?" Dr. Seddon hesitated. Too calmly, perhaps. He claimed she had complained of dizziness after dinner and collapsed. No doctor was called until after she had passed. Poirot's voice softened. "And the mother?" "Dead these 5 years. The household consists only of Mr. Allen, his widowed sister Mrs. Graves, and the younger brother, Henry. The girl was their pride, or so everyone thought." Poirot's expression changed slightly. "Everyone thought?" The doctor sighed. "Larkspur Hollow is a small village, Mr. Poirot. People notice things. There were whispers that Mr. Allen was a strict man, unyielding, proud, and easily offended. He disapproved of Jasmine's friendship with a certain young man from the neighbouring town. A clerk, I believe." "Ah," said Poirot softly. "The eternal struggle, youth and love against pride and property." Dr. Seddon nodded grimly. "When she disappeared for 2 days in January, the family claimed she had gone to visit a friend, but the truth," he glanced uneasily at Poirot, "was that she had run away with that young man. They were found together in London. The father brought her home and swore she would never leave again." A silence fell upon the room, heavy as the mist outside. Poirot's eyes were half closed, his fingertips pressed together. "Tell me, doctor," he said at last, "did you observe the body yourself?" "I did," said Dr. Seddon after a pause. "There were no visible marks, but her lips," he hesitated, "were unusually pale, almost white. I noted it at the time, but the father insisted she had fainted before death. I could not prove otherwise." Poirot rose slowly, his expression grave. "Doctor, your instincts do you credit. A pale lip, a hurried cremation, a proud father, and a girl who dared to love beneath her station. I think, mon ami, we stand not before a tragedy of the heart, but before the heart of a tragedy." An hour later, as the taxi carried them toward Jasmine's family home, a large, ivy-covered house at the edge of the village, Hastings watched Poirot's composed reflection in the window. "You think the girl was murdered, don't you?" he asked quietly. Poirot's eyes remained on the road ahead. "Murder, Hastings, is not always born of hatred. Sometimes it springs from love, distorted, twisted, made monstrous by pride. There is no crime so cruel as one committed in the name of honour." The words hung in the air, chilling despite the afternoon sun. As the house came into view, its windows dark and expressionless, Poirot adjusted his tie with surgical precision. "Let us meet this family," he murmured, "and see which of them can lie to Hercule Poirot with eyes as calm as the dead girl's." Chapter 2. The Girl with the Golden Future. The Allen residence stood upon a gentle rise at the far end of the village, a house of respectable age and unbending personality. The ivy upon its stone walls clung like memory, and the curtains at the front windows were drawn with military precision. It was the sort of English home that proclaimed order, discipline, and, if one looked closer, a certain fear of imperfection. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings were received not by a maid, but by the master himself. Mr. Edmund Allen was a tall, square-shouldered man in his late 50s, dressed in a dark wool suit, though the day was mild. His silver hair was meticulously parted, his manner composed, yet there lingered in his eyes a hardness that spoke of command rather than grief. "Mr. Allen," Poirot began gently, bowing slightly, "permit me to express my sympathies. Your daughter's death at such an age must be a sorrow beyond words." The man inclined his head briefly. "I appreciate your concern, Monsieur Poirot. Dr. Seddon mentioned that you might call. I'm afraid, however, that there is little to discuss. The case, if one can call it that, has already been settled. My daughter suffered a sudden cardiac seizure. It was God's will." "Mais naturellement," murmured Poirot. "One accepts the will of heaven, but sometimes heaven is given poor advice from earth, no?" Allen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I beg your pardon?" "Ah, it is nothing," Poirot said smoothly. "I have merely found that where the young die, the cause is rarely as simple as the doctor's pen makes it. I am interested only in truth, and truth, you see, is never disrespectful." There was a pause, a faint tension, invisible yet tangible, like the silence before a glass cracks. "Very well," Allen said at last, with restrained patience. "If it will satisfy curiosity, you may speak to my sister, Mrs. Graves. She has managed the house since my wife passed away." Mrs. Beatrice Graves entered moments later, a severe woman in grey, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed little. Her expression was one of formal politeness, but beneath it Poirot sensed something brittle. A woman who had seen too much, perhaps, or hidden too long. "You wish to know about poor Jasmine?" she said, folding her hands. "She was a clever girl, far too clever for her own peace of mind. Always reading, always dreaming, her mother's child." "Did she enjoy good health?" Poirot asked quietly. "Oh, yes," said Mrs. Graves, her tone carefully neutral. "Too good. She had too much energy, too much independence of thought. Edmund tried to guide her, but—" She stopped abruptly, then smiled with chilly correctness. "It is of no matter now." "On the contrary, madame," said Poirot softly. "It is of the greatest matter. When one dies so young, it is the living who provide the cause." Mrs. Graves looked at him sharply. "Are you suggesting—" "I suggest nothing," said Poirot. "I only listen, and already I hear more than words." They were shown into Jasmine's former room, kept, it seemed, exactly as she had left it. It was a bright chamber facing the garden with floral curtains, a mahogany desk, and a bookshelf lined with medical texts. On the wall hung a small framed certificate, Excellence in Science 1953, and on the dressing table lay a silver hairbrush, still speckled with fine golden strands. Hastings looked around, touched. "Charming girl by the look of it, lively, hard to imagine." "Indeed," said Poirot softly. "Observe, Hastings, the shoes under the chair, one tilted inward, one straight, the wardrobe door slightly ajar, but the hangers perfectly spaced. The room was tidied by another hand. A girl of intelligence leaves traces of life. Here, there are none. Tout est en ordre. Too much order." Poirot bent near the dressing table, inspecting the surface minutely. "Tiens, see here, the faint circle of moisture upon the wood. A glass stood here recently, perhaps in the night. Yet the bed linen is freshly pressed. Someone wished to erase a moment, not preserve a memory." He turned to Mrs. Graves. "May I ask who tended to this room after the young lady's passing?" "I did," she said shortly. "I could not bear to see it in disarray." "Ah, bien sûr," said Poirot. "The instinct to restore control, how human it is after chaos." They descended to the drawing-room, where the late afternoon light fell through lace curtains like pale dust. The mantelpiece displayed a photograph of Jasmine at 17, smiling, holding a bouquet. Poirot studied it thoughtfully. "She had ambition," he said. "It shines in her eyes. Such ambition often meets resistance." Mr. Allen's voice behind him was quiet but edged. "Ambition is admirable when guided properly. My daughter was young, idealistic. She lacked judgment." Poirot turned. "In what manner, monsieur?" "She formed an attachment," Allen said stiffly, "with a man entirely unsuitable, a clerk, from a lower background, the sort of person who flatters young girls into foolishness. She was taken in." Hastings frowned. "Taken in? Do you mean she—" "She ran away," Allen interrupted coldly. "For 2 days. The scandal was contained, thank God, before it reached the village press. I retrieved her, and she promised obedience." Poirot's tone grew almost tender. And did she keep that promise? Allen's eyes flickered, a fraction too long. She did her duty, that is all I shall say. Poirot inclined his head. Merci? Duty? Yes. A word of noble sound, but it can be heavy upon the heart. When they left the house, the air outside seemed clearer, freer. The village bell tolled the hour as Poirot stood gazing at the house's upper windows, his expression unreadable. "Well, Poirot," said Hastings as they walked down the lane, "what do you make of it?" Poirot tapped his cane lightly against a stone. "I make of it, my friend, a family in which every smile is a mask, and every word an apology to the dead. Do you think the father killed her? Ah, non. We do not jump like the kangaroo, we observe." He paused, glancing back once more. There was in that room the faint odour of almonds, very faint, but to a nose that has known murder before, unmistakable. Hastings started. "Almonds? You mean poison?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Oui. Cyanide leaves its perfume like a ghost in the air. The window had been opened since, but not soon enough. Our young Jasmine did not die of the heart. Her heart was quite innocent. It was her family's honour that killed her." That evening, back at the Beeches, Poirot sat before the hearth, the fire's glow reflecting in his dark eyes. Dr. Seddon had prepared tea, but scarcely touched his cup, too intent upon the detective's words. "She was poisoned, you believe?" asked the doctor. Poirot nodded slowly. "Not in the violent sense, no glass shattered, no cry of pain. A small dose, perhaps hidden in milk or tea, something that would bring faintness, then stillness. She would close her eyes, and those who feared scandal could whisper heart failure with sincerity." Dr. Seddon looked stricken. "And you think the father?" Poirot raised a finger. "I think, mon cher docteur, that in this house the word honour was sharper than any knife. Perhaps it was he, perhaps another, but one thing I know, someone killed the girl, not out of hatred, but to silence her choice." Hastings exhaled slowly. "It's monstrous." "Yes," said Poirot softly. "And yet how often does murder wear the mask of virtue? They kill and call it duty, they bury and call it honour." He rose, adjusting his cufflinks. "Tomorrow, Hastings, we shall meet the young man, this clerk. If love survives death, he will tell us what truly lived in her heart." Chapter 3. A family in mourning. The following morning dawned pale and cold. A thin mist rolled over the Surrey fields, veiling the hedgerows like a shroud. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in a grey suit and polished patent shoes, stood at the window of the Beeches and sipped his chocolate thoughtfully. Behind him, Hastings wrestled with his tie, muttering something unprintable about English collars and Belgian patience. "You are agitated, Hastings," said Poirot mildly. "Already you feel the tragedy of youth cut short, eh?" Hastings turned. "It's a rotten business, that poor girl, and the father. He's not grieving, he's performing, as if sorrow were a duty." Poirot's lips curved. "Ah, you see it too. The bereaved Englishman, toujours correct, never a hair astray. But the truth, mon ami, is that grief, which must be hidden, is often guilt in disguise." There was a knock at the door. Dr. Seddon entered, carrying his hat and a folded letter. "From the local constable," he said. "He located the young man Jasmine was involved with, a Mr. Daniel Hargreaves, works as a clerk in the Guildford Municipal Office. He has agreed to meet you at 11. Poirot nodded. "Très bien. Let us see, then, if the heart of this affair beats still." They found Daniel Hargreaves waiting at a modest tea-room near the Guildford Bridge. He was 23 or thereabouts, thin, pale, and poorly shaven. His brown eyes were tired, but not defeated. When Poirot introduced himself, Daniel rose at once, nervous but determined. "I've read about you, sir," he said, his voice low. "Dr. Seddon told me you were looking into Jasmine's death. You don't think it was natural, do you?" Poirot gestured for him to sit. My dear young man, I think that natural is a word the English use when they wish not to think at all. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he stirred his tea. I loved her, Mr. Poirot. Truly, she wanted to be a doctor, she wanted to help people. Her father never liked me, said I wasn't her kind. But Jasmine, she wasn't like them. She didn't care about money or status. She said I made her feel free. Free, murmured Poirot. A dangerous word in a household built on obedience. Daniel nodded miserably. When she ran away, I begged her to go back just to calm them. I didn't think they'd hurt her. And then, he swallowed hard. And then the notice came. Heart failure. It didn't make sense. Jasmine was stronger than I've ever been. Poirot leaned forward. Did she ever tell you she was afraid? A flicker passed over the young man's face. Once. The night before she left for London, she sent me a letter, burned most of it before posting, she said, in case her father found out. What she wrote? She said her aunt, Mrs. Graves, wasn't what she seemed, that she knew something about her mother's death. Ah bon? Poirot's eyes brightened. Her mother? How did she die? Daniel looked uncertain. A fall down the stairs, I think. Years ago. Everyone said it was an accident. Poirot sat back, fingertips together. Accidents, Hastings, are the family jewels of the English. They keep them polished and pass them down. At that afternoon, Poirot and Hastings returned to the Allen house. The air inside was thick with lavender and silence. Mrs. Graves received them in the drawing-room, her black dress unwrinkled, her composure marble cold. "I thought you had concluded your inquiries, Monsieur Poirot," she said, coolly. "Mais non, madame. The affairs of the dead are like old trunks. When one opens them, one never knows what moth may fly out." Her lips thinned. "You are a poet, not a detective." "Pardon, I am both," said Poirot with a small bow. "Tell me, madame, your sister-in-law, Mrs. Allen, she died tragically, did she not?" The woman stiffened. "A fall. The stairs were polished. She slipped. I was here when it happened." "Justice ciel, how shocking! But perhaps you recall... Was she alone?" Mrs. Graves hesitated. "No. Edmund was home, but he was in his study. He did not see it." Poirot's voice was very quiet. "And you did?" "I heard the scream," she said quickly. "I found her. There was nothing to be done." Poirot nodded slowly, as though weighing her words upon invisible scales. Then, turning toward the window, he asked lightly, "Hey, and Jasmine, did she ever speak of her mother's death?" "Children forget," Mrs. Graves said too quickly. "Some forget, others inherit," murmured Poirot. When they stepped out into the garden, Hastings exhaled. "You think Mrs. Graves knows more than she admits?" Poirot stopped by the gate. "Hastings, when a woman lives 20 years under the shadow of another's will, she becomes either saint or serpent. Mrs. Graves is not the saintly kind." He glanced back at the darkened windows. "And yet, mon ami, something disturbs me more. Jasmine's mother, dead from a fall. Jasmine, poisoned. 2 women, 1 house, and in both deaths, the man remains untarnished. You see the pattern?" "Yes," said Hastings grimly. "A convenient pattern." Poirot smiled faintly. "Convenience is the hallmark of the English murderer." That evening, Poirot requested to see the parish records. Dr. Seddon, intrigued, arranged access through the vicar. Inside the musty vestry, Poirot pored over the burial registers with a small magnifying glass. "Here," he said suddenly, "Mrs. Evelyn Allen, interred June 1938. Cause accidental fall. Attending witness, Beatrice Graves. And look, Jasmine Allen, June 1954. Cause cardiac arrest. Attending witness, Beatrice Graves again." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Tiens, tiens, tiens. But what does it mean?" asked Hastings. "It means, mon ami," said Poirot softly, "that in this family the hand that mourns may also be the hand that kills. That night, Poirot acted. He returned to the Allen house unannounced, carrying only his hat and his calm. Mrs. Graves received him in her sitting room, her expression icy. "You again? This is indecent." Poirot inclined his head. "Indecent? Perhaps, but truth, madame, is seldom polite. You see, I have discovered something." She folded her arms. "And what might that be?" "That the woman known as Beatrice Graves," said Poirot evenly, "is not who she claims to be." Her eyes flashed. "What nonsense! No. Let us be precise. There was no Beatrice Graves registered as born to that name in Hampshire in 1897, but there was—" Poirot paused delicately. "An Evelyn Beatrice Hammond, a woman who married Edmund Allen in 1936, and whose accidental death was recorded 2 years later. Your face, madame, has changed with time, but the eyes, les yeux, remain the same." For the first time, Mrs. Graves trembled. You're mad." Poirot's voice softened, yet cut like a knife. "You never died, you vanished, and when your husband remarried, you returned, not as wife, but as sister, to punish, to control, to destroy. You poisoned your own daughter, Jasmine, the only one who might have uncovered the truth." Her hand went to her throat, white as marble. "You can't prove it." "Mais oui," Poirot said quietly. "I can. The parish witness signatures, both yours, the handwriting identical. You feared Jasmine would learn that her aunt was her mother. When she found the truth in her mother's old letters, you silenced her." Mrs. Graves's eyes filled with something between fury and despair. "She was going to tell him, tell Edmund. After all he did to me, she would have made him see what I became. I couldn't bear it." Poirot's tone was almost tender. "And so you killed her, to preserve a vengeance that had long since consumed you." When Poirot and Hastings left the house, dawn was breaking pale over the fields. The constable followed soon after to make the arrest. As the door shut behind them, Hastings exhaled a long breath. "Good Lord, Poirot, she wasn't just the murderer. She was the dead woman herself." Poirot nodded gravely. "The dead, Hastings, are never so quiet as we imagine. Some return not as ghosts, but as guilt given form. And in this house it was not honor that killed, it was a mother's shame." He looked toward the rising sun, eyes sad and thoughtful. The daughter dreamed of healing others. The mother, only of her own revenge. Between them, love became the poison. Chapter 4. The Stranger in the Rain. The rain came softly that night, as though the heavens themselves wished to cleanse the village of Larkspur Hollow. It tapped faintly against the window-panes of the Beeches, where Hercule Poirot sat before the fire, polishing his silver moustache tips in thoughtful silence. Across from him, Captain Hastings stirred uneasily. "You've solved it then, Poirot." The aunt, or rather the mother, confessed. Jasmine was poisoned. Evelyn Allen killed her own daughter. There's your case, clear as day. Poirot looked up, his expression distant, almost melancholic. "Mon ami, when the surface of a pond is still, it is then one must look for the shadow beneath." Hastings blinked. "You mean there's more?" Poirot's voice was very quiet. "There is always more when the emotions of love and hate intertwine." The poor lady, yes, she confessed. But confession, Hastings, is like perfume. Sometimes it masks, not reveals. He leaned forward slightly. What if Mrs. Allen, our Beatrice Graves, did not poison Jasmine at all? Early the next morning, Poirot returned to the Allen house. The storm had washed the lawn silver, and a thin mist hung over the garden like a veil of breath. Inside, the rooms felt emptied of spirit. Evelyn, now stripped of her false name, had been taken into custody the previous night. Edmund Allen stood alone by the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. The flames cast a faint red glow across his stern features, but his eyes were distant. "Mr. Allen," said Poirot gently. "I have come not to disturb your grief, but to understand it." The man's lips twitched faintly. "Understanding is a luxury, Monsieur Poirot. I lost my wife once. Now I've lost her again, and my daughter too." Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, a double tragedy. Though I wonder, monsieur, if it was tragedy or design." Allen turned sharply. "What are you implying?" Poirot's voice remained soft. "I think, perhaps, that your wife's so-called death years ago was not an accident at all, but an arrangement. And I think you were the architect." The colour drained from Allen's face. "You're mad!" Poirot continued calmly. "You discovered her infidelity, perhaps. You staged her fall and buried the name, not the woman. Then, years later, when she returned, veiled in repentance and a false identity, you welcomed her back as your sister, not out of forgiveness, but to keep her under control." Allen's hand clenched at his side. "You have no proof?" "On the contrary," said Poirot, "in your study there is a chest marked E.A. 1938. In it, the parish correspondence concerning your wife's accident. The letter from the undertaker is unsigned, the death certificate witnessed only by you. You buried an empty coffin, monsieur." There was a terrible silence. Only the rain outside gave sound to the world. Finally, Edmund Allen spoke, his voice hoarse. "She betrayed me, left me for another man. When she came crawling back after his death, I let her live, under my name, under my roof, under my control. She was to raise Jasmine as her penance, and she did, until that girl began to ask questions." Poirot's gaze did not waver. "So you silenced them both?" The man gave a short, bitter laugh. "No, she killed Jasmine. She said so herself." Poirot shook his head slowly. "No, monsieur, she said she could not bear it, but not that she did it. The poison was not hers, it was yours." Hastings, who had stood frozen by the doorway, gasped. "Poirot, what?" Poirot raised a hand. "Un moment, Hastings. Let us examine with order and method. The glass upon the dressing-table in Jasmine's room bore 2 sets of fingerprints, those of the girl and those of her father, none of Mrs. Graves. The doctor told us the milk was brought upstairs by Mr. Allen himself, under the pretext of soothing her nerves. He said so with pride, did he not?" Edmund Allen stared at him, ashen. Poirot's voice deepened. "And why did you cremate the body in haste? Not to protect your wife's secret, but your own. You knew cyanide would betray you in the post-mortem. You wanted everyone to believe the lie, that it was Evelyn's crime alone. You let her take the blame, knowing she would never deny it. A woman consumed by guilt, desperate to believe she had done wrong. You used her conscience as your shield." Allen's breath came ragged. "I loved my daughter." Poirot's eyes softened, dangerously. "No, monsieur, you loved only your pride. You called it honor. But honor that destroys innocence is no honor. It is vanity wearing the mask of virtue." For a long moment there was silence. Then Edmund Allen sagged into the chair by the fire, his shoulders shaking. "She had his letters," he muttered. "The man she loved, that clerk. I found them in her drawer. She meant to run away again, to shame me before the village. I only wanted to stop her, just for a while, just enough to frighten her. I didn't mean for it to—" Poirot closed his eyes briefly. "Mon Dieu. The murderer always says that." He turned to Hastings. "Fetch Inspector Blunt, if you please. Mr. Allen will make his statement." As Hastings left the room, Poirot remained standing, gazing at the weary man before him. The firelight danced across the mantel, illuminating the photograph of Jasmine, smiling, bright, untarnished by the ugliness of the living. "You have built your life upon lies, monsieur," Poirot said softly. "You buried your wife, then her name, and at last your daughter's truth. But lies, like ghosts, cannot rest. They rise again and again until justice breathes." Later that evening, the rain ceased. The sky turned the colour of tarnished silver as Poirot and Hastings walked back toward the beaches. The village lamps flickered dimly, halos of light in the fog. Hastings finally broke the silence. "You knew from the start, didn't you? You never truly believed the aunt did it." Poirot smiled faintly. "I believed what people wished me to believe. It is a valuable exercise. Lies reveal themselves most clearly when spoken with sincerity." He paused, his gaze softening, as he looked back toward the house where tragedy had lived so long. "You see, Hastings," he said quietly, "Evelyn Allen killed her marriage, yes, but Edmund Allen killed the future. Between them, they destroyed the only innocent soul they shared." "And what of Daniel Hargreaves?" Hastings asked softly. Poirot sighed. "He will mourn, perhaps forever, but in his heart he will keep her alive as she was, the girl with the golden future. And that, mon ami, is how the dead truly live." He adjusted his hat, the mist curling around his silhouette. "Come. Justice, like the rain, has done its work. Now it is time for peace." Chapter 5. The Whisper of Rebellion. The next morning, Larkspur Hollow awoke beneath a grey sky. Clouds drifted like slow bruises across the horizon, and a damp wind moved through the hedgerows, whispering against the leaves. Within the beeches, Hercule Poirot sat at the breakfast table, spoon poised above his boiled egg, staring not at the food, but at the unopened envelope before him. It was a plain envelope, addressed in neat, youthful handwriting. Hastings entered, buttoning his jacket. "Morning, Poirot. You look as though the egg has committed a crime." Poirot's lips curved faintly. "It is not the egg, mon ami, but the message. It was delivered an hour ago by a village postboy. Addressed to me, yet posted nearly a month past before the girl's death." Hastings stopped mid-step. "Jasmine Allen?" "Précisément." Poirot tapped the envelope gently. "Let us see what the dead wish to tell the living." He broke the seal with careful precision. Inside lay a single sheet of notepaper, folded twice. Poirot unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the lines. When he reached the end, his face grew solemn, not shocked, but deeply moved. "Well?" said Hastings, impatient. "What does it say?" Poirot read aloud, his voice low, almost reverent. "If anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. There is something wrong in this house. I hear whispers behind doors when they think I sleep. My father says he prays for forgiveness every night, but I think he means something else. I found letters in the old chest in his study. They are not his. They are my mother's. They prove she never died. And if she's alive, then who is the woman living upstairs pretending to be his sister? I will not be silent any more. Jasmine." There was silence in the room, broken only by the faint ticking of Poirot's pocket watch. Hastings swallowed. "Good Lord. She knew." Poirot nodded slowly. "Yes, and she understood far more than any of us suspected. The child had the courage her elders lacked." He folded the letter gently. "But notice, Hastings, the final sentence. I will not be silent any more." That was not written as fear. It was a declaration. Jasmine intended to act. She had rebellion in her heart. By midday, Poirot had requested access to the Allen house once more. The constable stationed there greeted him with weary respect. The place felt colder now, empty of lies, yet heavy with ghosts. Poirot moved through the rooms with quiet precision, studying what remained untouched. The father's study was a shrine to order, polished oak, iron locks, and the faint scent of pipe smoke. On the desk sat the same chest Jasmine had mentioned. Its lid bore scratches where the varnish had worn thin, evidence of a key forced hurriedly, perhaps in anger. "Curious," murmured Poirot. "A secret opened in haste is never truly hidden again." He examined the contents, a collection of letters bound in a red ribbon, each bearing the initials E.A. The earliest dated 1936, written in a woman's hand, affectionate, desperate, and filled with apology. One letter, half-burnt, caught his eye. "I cannot live beneath your rule any longer, Edmund. You have turned our home into a prison. I go not for shame, but for breath." Poirot replaced the letters carefully. So the wife fled, the husband silenced her memory, and the daughter, in discovering both, paid the price of knowing truth too soon. As he turned to leave, something small caught his eye. A thin black notebook wedged behind a drawer panel. He pried it loose, delicately, and smiled. Voila! The diary of a girl who dared to dream. That evening, as rain began again, Poirot and Hastings sat by the fire at the Beeches. The diary lay open before them, its pages trembling slightly in the draught. Poirot read aloud with the gentleness of one handling something sacred. March 5th. Father watches me always, even when I study. He says I must not read novels. They make girls foolish. But I've begun reading about Florence Nightingale. She too defied her family. April the Stouty. Sometimes Aunt Beatrice looks at me strangely as if she knows something I don't. She touches my hair and says, "Your mother was foolish." I asked her what she meant. She turned pale. April to 12th. I dream of London and of freedom. Daniel says we will go one day and never come back. Father would never forgive it, but love is worth defiance. May the 14th. I heard them quarrelling downstairs, White Father and Aunt Beatrice. He said, "You owe me obedience as much as she does." I don't know what that means. June the 2nd. I found my mother's name again, Evelyn Allen, in a parish book in the vicar's drawer. The same handwriting as Aunt Beatrice's. I don't know why, but I feel afraid. Poirot closed the diary slowly. There, Hastings, you see? The truth was all around them, like a mirror they dared not look into. Hastings shook his head. Poor girl. She was trapped in a web long before she ever took her first step out of that house. "Oui," said Poirot softly. A web spun not of malice, but of vanity and shame. The father who murdered to preserve honour, the mother who lived in disguise to preserve pride, and between them a girl who dared to choose love. There was a knock at the door. Dr. Seddon entered, hat in hand. "They've completed the full toxicology, Poirot. It confirms cyanide as you suspected. But there's something else. The girl had ingested a smaller dose 2 days before her death. Not enough to kill, but enough to make her ill." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Deux fois? Then it was a test, or a warning." He rose abruptly. "Hastings, do you recall the words she used in her letter?" Whispers. She heard them behind doors. I think perhaps those whispers belonged not to quarrelling adults, but to someone else entirely. "What do you mean?" Poirot looked out into the mist. "I mean that not all conspiracies are spoken aloud. Some are written." Stewart. That night, Poirot returned to the house once more, alone. The constable at the gate had long grown accustomed to his quiet visits and let him pass without question. Inside, he moved through the corridors by lamplight, pausing outside Jasmine's room. Her desk, though cleared, still bore faint impressions of writing beneath the blotter. Poirot lifted it carefully and tilted it toward the light. The faint indentations revealed lines of writing, erased but not lost. He traced them with his gloved fingertip, murmuring as he read, "If I cannot change Father's mind, I will show the world. I have copied everything, the letters, the signatures, the records. They are hidden where he would never look. With the dead he pretends to honour." Poirot froze. His eyes flicked toward the window, where the rain streaked like tears down the glass. Then with sudden clarity he turned and hurried down the stairs toward the family crypt behind the garden. It was past midnight. The rain had stopped, and mist clung low over the earth. Poirot pushed open the rusted gate and stepped into the Allen mausoleum, a cold stone chamber, its air heavy with damp and memory. He lit his lantern and examined the marble plaques. Evelyn Allen, 1938. Beneath it, a small brass vase held decayed flowers. And beneath the vase, hidden within the hollow base of the stand, a bundle of papers bound in red thread. Poirot lifted them out gently. Inside were copies of everything Jasmine had found. Her mother's marriage certificate, letters of flight, Edmund's confession of falsified death records, even a recent note in her own handwriting. Truth has its own heart. I will not let him kill it twice. Poirot's throat tightened. Ma pauvre enfant, you fought with courage, and though you fell, you have triumphed. He stepped out into the pale dawn, holding the girl's evidence close, the first light touching the soaked earth like absolution. Later that morning, as the sun broke through the fog, Poirot stood before the inspector. Edmund Allen had been taken into custody. Evelyn Allen, frail and broken, had confessed the lesser crime of silence. The village of Larkspur Hollow whispered her name in pity, not horror. Hastings looked at Poirot, admiration in his eyes. She left proof of everything. She knew they'd destroy her, yet she hid the truth for someone to find. Poirot nodded gravely. Yes, Hastings, she understood something that her elders never could. That honor is not obedience, but integrity. In dying for truth, she restored the very thing they had tried to protect. He turned toward the churchyard, where the mist was lifting. The girl who loved, the girl who rebelled, the girl who refused silence. She has spoken at last. Chapter 6. The Shadows of Honor. The day after Edmund Allen's arrest was unusually bright for Larkspur Hollow. The rain that had veiled the countryside for days lifted, leaving the air so clean that every sound, the toll of the church bell, the bark of a distant dog, seemed too sharp, almost intrusive. At the Beeches, Hercule Poirot sat near the fire, reading through Jasmine's recovered papers for the third time. He moved with deliberate care, his eyes narrowing on each sentence as if studying a map. Captain Hastings entered, carrying a tray of tea, his expression grim. "They've taken him to Guildford jail," said Hastings, setting down the tray. "He'll be charged formally tomorrow. Evelyn Allen, well, she's in the hospital ward. Seems the shock nearly finished her." Poirot inclined his head gently. It is always so. The one who sins through silence suffers more than the one who sins through deed. Silence corrodes the soul. He closed the file softly. "And yet, Hastings, I do not think we have reached the end. There is a part of this story that remains in shadow." Hastings frowned. "How can there be? He killed her, Poirot. We have the letter, the fingerprints, even his confession." "Ah, non, mon ami. A confession of fact, yes, but not of motive. And in crime, as in life, the motive is everything. It is the soul of the act." Poirot's eyes glimmered. Why, I ask myself, did he call it honor? What shadow did that word conceal? Yet that afternoon, Poirot requested to see Edmund Allen in his holding cell at Guildford. The constable raised an eyebrow but complied, for even among English officers, Poirot's name carried the authority of truth itself. The small grey cell smelled faintly of lime-wash and despair. Allen sat at a narrow table, his hair dishevelled, his once impeccable suit creased. His eyes were fixed on the floor, but when Poirot entered, he raised them with the wary pride of a man who had lived too long by appearances. "So," he said quietly, "the great detective comes to see the fallen man. You've had your triumph, Monsieur Poirot. What more do you want?" Poirot took a chair opposite him, folding his hands neatly. "Not triumph, monsieur. Understanding. I have always believed that the heart of crime lies not in evil, but in error. Tell me, please, why did you do it? Why call it honor?" Allen's mouth twitched into something between a smile and a grimace. "You wouldn't understand." "Perhaps not, but I will try." There was silence for a long moment. Then Edmund Allen began to speak, slowly, deliberately, his voice trembling with the weight of years. "You think it was pride," he said. "But it was fear. Fear that my life would be seen for what it was, a lie. When Evelyn left me, I told the world she was dead. I couldn't bear the pity, the whispers. The great Edmund Allen abandoned by his wife. No, that would not do." His hands clenched. "And when she returned, begging forgiveness, I saw my chance to control the story. I let her live as my sister, made her serve me in silence, reminded her every day of what she owed me. I thought that would be justice. But Jasmine, she was her mother's spirit reborn, defiant, clever. She looked at me as if she saw through every mask I'd ever worn. And she was right." Poirot's voice was low. "She discovered the truth." "Yes," Allen whispered. "And worse, she pitied me. That's what I couldn't stand. She pitied me, my daughter, the one thing I had left that was pure. I saw in her eyes what I'd become, small, cruel, afraid." He laughed bitterly. "I didn't mean to kill her. I meant to frighten her. I wanted her to obey, to stop looking at me like that. But when she collapsed, when she stopped breathing, it felt quiet, peaceful, as if the noise of truth had finally stopped." Poirot's expression was unreadable. "And so you called it honor?" Allen's voice cracked. "Because if it wasn't, it was murder, and I couldn't bear that word. Honor sounded clean, forgivable. But it was just vanity, Monsieur Poirot. Vanity in a respectable suit." Poirot rose slowly. "You see, monsieur, even now you speak truth. The tragedy is not that you killed her. It is that you believed you were right to do so." He looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You are not a monster, Edmund Allen. You are something far sadder. A man who mistook control for love." When Poirot left the cell, the guards saluted him without a word. Outside, the air smelled of rain again, sharp, metallic, like tears on iron. That evening, Poirot and Hastings returned to the village churchyard. The fog was rolling in once more, low and silver, blurring the headstones into ghostly shapes. A new grave had been dug beside the old Allen tomb. The stone was simple, unadorned. Jasmine Evelyn Allen, 1936-1954. She chose truth. Poirot stood silently for a long time. Hastings moved, spoke first. "You've seen many cases, Poirot. Does this one trouble you more than most?" Poirot's eyes were thoughtful. "Yes, my friend, because here the murderer and the victim were bound not by hatred, but by reflection. The father looked at the daughter and saw the best of himself, and the worst. That is a cruel mirror, Hastings. Some men break the glass, others break what it shows." He brushed a raindrop from his sleeve. "She was too young to die, yes, but in dying she has killed something far older. The illusion that honor is louder than conscience." They turned to leave, but at the gate stood a figure, Daniel Hargreaves, pale and silent in the fading light. In his hand was a small bunch of white lilacs. Poirot regarded him gently. "You have come to say goodbye?" Daniel nodded. "Not goodbye, sir, just thank you for believing she mattered." Poirot's gaze softened. "She still matters, because she has taught even those who judged her what honor truly means. Go now, monsieur, live the life she dreamed of. That will be your justice." As the young man walked toward the grave, the first drops of rain began to fall again, light and slow, like a benediction. Hastings looked at Poirot. "It's strange. For a girl so young, she seems to have left behind more truth than any of them ever spoke in life." Poirot smiled faintly. "Mais oui, mon ami, that is the irony of tragedy. The innocent are the only ones who can teach the guilty." She was the whisper that became thunder. They turned toward the road as the rain fell in earnest, blurring the horizon. And in that soft downpour it seemed as though the very sky wept. Not for the crime, but for the courage it took to reveal it. Chapter 7, Poirot. Questions the living. The hospital ward at Guildford was a place of whispers and disinfectant. Pale curtains divided the narrow beds, and the air was thick with the faint hum of rain on glass. At the far end of the ward, a nurse pointed quietly toward the last bed. "She hasn't spoken all morning, sir," she murmured, "but she's awake." Evelyn Allen, once known as Beatrice Graves, lay against the pillow, her face a study in exhaustion. The lines of age and grief had deepened overnight, carving shadows beneath her eyes. When Hercule Poirot approached, she looked up with the faintest trace of disbelief. "You again," she said hoarsely. "Have you come to see the ruins you've made?" Poirot's expression was gentle. "I have come to see what remains, madam, not what is ruined." She gave a dry, bitter laugh. "There's nothing left. My daughter is dead. My husband will hang. What remains but shame?" "Truth," said Poirot softly. "It remains, madame, and it is kinder than shame." He drew a chair close to her bedside. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain whispered faintly against the windows, and the steady ticking of a hallway clock seemed to count the spaces between her breaths. "Madame Allen," Poirot began at last, "I have spoken with your husband. I know now what happened years ago, your departure, your return, your silence. But there is still something I do not understand." Her eyes flickered toward him. "You understand more than enough." "No, madam," said Poirot gently. "I understand the facts, yes, but not the heart. Tell me, when you returned to that house, why did you stay? Why live beneath the roof of the man who made you a ghost?" Evelyn turned her face toward the window. "Because I had nowhere else to go. My family disowned me. The man I left with, he died. I thought I would end up on the streets. Edmund found me, and instead of pitying me, he offered me penance. He said I could atone for my disgrace by raising Jasmine under his guidance. I accepted. I thought, if I obeyed, perhaps God would forgive me." Poirot's eyes softened. "You did not obey God, madame. You obeyed your jailer." Her voice broke. "And I was too weak to leave again." Poirot was silent for a long time. Then he spoke with quiet intensity. "There is something else, madame." "The poison?" "It was given in milk, was it not? But Jasmine was clever. She knew bitterness from chemistry. A girl who studies medicine would have tasted cyanide at once, yet she drank it. Willingly. Why?" Evelyn's eyes widened. Fear flickered in them like a dying flame. "What are you saying?" Poirot's voice was low, compassionate, yet inexorable. "You see, I have read her diary, and I have seen her letter. The girl knew everything. She had gathered every proof, every document. She planned to bring them to the authorities. She was not afraid of death, only of being silenced. So I ask again, why did she drink?" Evelyn began to tremble. No, she wouldn't." Poirot leaned forward. "She wrote, 'If I cannot change him, I will show the world. I have copied everything. They are hidden with the dead he pretends to honor.'" "That was not despair, madame. That was determination. She did not intend to die that night. But when she realized what was in the glass, she made a choice." Evelyn's voice broke into a whisper. "What choice?" Poirot's eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "To drink. To make him believe his secret safe. To give her life for the truth, knowing she had already hidden the evidence that would one day destroy him." For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The rain faded, the sounds of the ward receded, and only the ticking clock remained, slow, inevitable. Evelyn covered her face with her hands and began to sob. She knew, oh, God forgive me, I thought she was so helpless. I never saw how brave she was." Poirot reached out and gently laid a hand on her arm. "Courage, madame. She loved you, even after all. She saw the truth of you, and she forgave it." "She left me nothing," Evelyn whispered. "Non," said Poirot softly. "She left you everything, the chance to live honestly at last." When Poirot stepped out of the ward into the corridor, the light outside had changed. The rain had stopped, and the sun broke faintly through the clouds, spilling narrow beams upon the tiled floor. Captain Hastings, waiting nearby, rose at once. "Well, what did she say?" Poirot adjusted his gloves thoughtfully. "She said nothing, and yet she confessed all. Jasmine did not die merely by her father's hand, Hastings. She died by her own act of defiance. She drank the poison knowingly, not to escape, but to ensure his destruction." Hastings stared. "You mean she sacrificed herself?" Poirot nodded gravely. "Exactement. She turned his weapon into her victory. He thought he silenced her. Instead, she silenced him." Hastings shook his head, awed. "That's astonishing. She outwitted them all." Poirot smiled sadly. "There is no mind so dangerous as that of a young woman who has seen too much injustice. Her father's vanity could not imagine that courage could look so quiet." Later that evening, Poirot and Hastings took a slow walk through Larkspur Hollow. The air was fresh now, and the smell of rain still clung to the hedges. The village, once thick with gossip, had fallen into respectful silence. Curtains that had fluttered with curiosity now hung still. People spoke softly when they passed Poirot, not from fear, but reverence. They paused at the churchyard gate. The sky above was streaked with late sunlight, pale gold against the damp stones. A robin sang briefly from the yew tree, a single note of life amid so much loss. Hastings exhaled. "You know, Poirot, this might be the saddest case I've ever seen." Poirot looked toward the grave. "Yes, my friend, sad, but not tragic. A tragedy ends in darkness. This ends in light. Jasmine Allen was not destroyed by her family's lies. She exposed them. She showed that truth, once born, cannot be killed, even by those who claim to act in its name." He placed his hat against his chest for a moment. A small, respectful bow to the dead. She fought not with violence, but with silence. She turned her suffering into justice. And that, Hastings, is the greatest rebellion of all. They walked away slowly, the fading sun falling behind them, the mist curling once more through the quiet village. Somewhere, far off, a church bell tolled, solemn, soft, and strangely pure. Chapter 8. The Heart That Never Failed. The courtroom in Guildford was filled to its heavy oak rafters. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching the motes of dust that danced like faint ghosts in the air. The world outside seemed calm, but inside, silence hung with unbearable weight. Edmund Allen stood in the dock, composed, almost statuesque. His face was pale, his grey suit immaculate, his pride intact to the very end. Beside him, Evelyn Allen sat in the witness bench, her hands trembling beneath a thin shawl. She was no longer the cold figure of Beatrice Graves. She was simply a woman who had lived too long in the shadows. At the front sat Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever, his hat resting neatly upon his knees. He had been summoned by the court to give his final testimony, a formality perhaps, for no one doubted his conclusions. Yet when he rose to speak, the air seemed to change. He bowed slightly to the magistrate. "My lord, I am not here to accuse or condemn. I am here only to illuminate what lies beneath the words honor and love, two of the most dangerous weapons in the hands of mankind." He turned toward the courtroom. "The facts are simple. Edmund Allen murdered his daughter Jasmine by means of cyanide. His motive was not money, not jealousy, not fear of exposure, but something far more poisonous, pride. He called it honor. He believed himself a just man, a moral man, even as he destroyed the only pure thing left in his life. And yet—" Poirot paused, his gaze softening. "The true irony is that the girl he killed understood honor better than he ever could." He reached into his pocket and drew out a folded paper. Jasmine's final letter, preserved now like a sacred relic. She knew what awaited her. She drank the poison not in ignorance but in defiance. In her silence, she shouted the truth louder than any of us. She left her father with his illusion, and in doing so, destroyed it. Poirot placed the paper on the table before him. She was not weak, she was not naive, she was magnificent. A murmur rippled through the court. Evelyn Allen began to weep quietly into her hands. Edmund Allen, for the first time since his arrest, looked up, not at Poirot but at the letter. His lips moved, though no sound came. Perhaps it was Jasmine's name, perhaps it was the word forgive. Poirot stepped back, his voice gentler now. We speak of justice as though it is something men create. But sometimes, my lord, justice is written by the dead. Jasmine Allen has already passed her verdict. She has freed her mother, exposed her father, and restored truth to the world she loved. I can add nothing more. He bowed and returned to his seat. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint ticking of the great courtroom clock, a heartbeat of time itself. Later that evening, the trial's conclusion echoed across the village. Edmund Allen was sentenced to life imprisonment. Evelyn Allen was released, her silence deemed punishment enough. The newspapers called it the honor killing of Surrey. The villagers called it the tragedy that changed everything, but Hercule Poirot called it something else entirely. That night he and Captain Hastings dined quietly at the Beeches. The fire burned low, the rain had returned, and the village lay shrouded in soft mist. Poirot sat in his armchair, hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the flickering flame. Hastings poured the coffee. "Well, Poirot, it's over. Justice served. The guilty punished. You should be pleased." Poirot smiled faintly. "Pleased?" "No, Hastings. Satisfied, but never pleased. The price of truth when paid by innocence is too costly for pleasure." He leaned back, his tone reflective, almost tender. "You see, my friend, the tragedy of this case is not murder. It is misunderstanding. The father mistook control for love. The mother mistook submission for virtue. But the daughter, la pauvre enfant, she understood both were prisons. She broke them, even if it cost her life. She was the only one whose heart did not fail." Hastings stared into the fire, silent. Poirot continued softly. "I once said that vanity is the root of all crime. But perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps it is fear. Fear of being seen for what one truly is. Jasmine Allen was not afraid. In that she triumphed." He stood, straightened his tie, and walked to the window. Outside, the rain fell gently over Larkspur Hollow, each drop glimmering in the lamplight like a tear made of light. Poirot whispered, almost to himself, "The rain, Hastings. It washes away the footprints, yes, but not the truth. The truth endures even when all else is forgotten." Hastings joined him at the window, following his gaze toward the misty graveyard beyond the trees. "Do you think she's at peace now?" Poirot smiled faintly, his eyes soft with compassion. "She is, mon ami, because she has taught us all the meaning of honor, not obedience, not silence, but courage. And that, I think, is peace enough for any soul." The fire crackled gently behind them. The rain fell without sound. And in the quiet heart of Surrey, where pride had once killed and truth had risen in its place, the name Jasmine Allen lingered, not as a tragedy, but as a triumph.